Welcome back to Car-Pinionated, our weekly show about cars, the car industry, and driving in general. Our guest today is Brian Moody, who is the executive editor for Kelley Blue Book, and we're talking recalls. Brian, welcome. So this week there's been a big recall of Toyota Tundras,
Yeah.
and where it sounds like part of the back end will fall off, and that's a bad thing. Um, we've been seeing a lot of uh, large scale recalls, and when I say large scale, I mean like six figures and above.
Yeah.
What do you, before we get into what people should do if their car is recalled,
hmm
what do you think is the reasoning behind having these recalls? So many, so big.
I think there's a few things. Yeah, I think there's a few things that the average person might not be aware of. Some seem some seem probably like on the surface, like, oh yeah, that kind of makes sense. Cars today are just becoming more and more complex. That's one thing. And they're more complex. There's more software. There's more options and features. There's also the idea that a recall can sometimes be for something that you or I might not consider to be that serious. For example, a missing page in a owner's manual, something like that. That could be a service bulletin or a recall if it's, in the end, is that really going to affect your car? Probably not. But then there's also the serious ones where like you need to address it immediately. And so there's all these things happening behind the scenes. One thing about the way cars are built today is that there's a lot of vendor sharing and a lot of streamlining. So it goes into other areas too. Like, for example, you probably have heard this as well when people say things like, boy, why don't they make that Honda Element anymore? I really loved that car. I'd like to get a new Honda Element. Well, they don't make those anymore, not because it wasn't a good car, not because people didn't want them, but because they couldn't make enough money sharing the parts across multiple vehicle lines. That's the thing today, is that it has to look different, but all the pieces that you can't see, the washers, the screws, the switches, all of that wiring harnesses, that has to be shared across multiple vehicles in order to make a threshold of profit. So think about that. When one thing is wrong from one vendor that is shared across multiple vehicles and multiple trim levels, what do you have? If one thing goes wrong, it's no longer just the Honda Element or whatever car it is. Now it's multiple cars in the hundreds of thousands, because that's the more cost efficient way of doing business. The perfect example of this is the Takata airbag story. Multiple brands, multiple vehicle lines, the largest recall in the history of the automobile, because many different automakers chose to do business with the vendor that they felt gave them the best value and the best product. So that's kind of why you see recalls in the hundreds of thousands. And then when you add to that, many vehicles have government mandated equipment. And not saying that that's a bad thing, but you can't have everything. There's no free.
Right, and when it's government mandated, it has to perform a certain way, do certain
Yeah.
things at certain times, and
Yes.
there's a textbook full of regulations, I'm sure. Um,
Right. I don't
when
think recalls are a bad thing on the surface, to be
no,
honest. Like I really don't. And I think people now, if you're going to buy a used car, or your car has a record number of recalls, 30, 40 recall, okay, I think we could probably all agree that that car may not be the best car. But the recall system in itself means that the system is working properly, that they caught this thing and now they're going to fix it for the customer for free.
right. I remember a long time ago talking to an astronaut on the space shuttle, and
Mm,
it was after a series of delays in the launch, and we talked about that, and they said the delays mean the system worked.
mm,
That we figured out something was
yeah,
wrong before it went really wrong, and
right,
that sort of adjusted my thinking on the importance of recalls, and
right,
what it ultimately means for the consumer. Um,
right.
when how do, can you describe to me the process of how how they discover that a recall needs to happen? What's that process? going from seeing a problem to ultimately issuing a recall?
Well, one thing that most people might not realize is that most recalls today are voluntary. There's
Mhm.
very few instances where the government compels an automaker or a manufacturer of something to recall a product, because you can imagine the bad press that would result in, well, we're not going to recall it, and the government has to either sue you or compel you. That just makes it look like you don't care. So most recalls today are just the automaker having their system of checks and balances, their testing, their after sale surveys, their dealership experiences. All of those things come together. If something is a big enough problem, they can go back and look, or they are regularly reevaluating the production process and what happened on what day. Why did this? And there's investigation that happens into that. It could be consumer initiated, or it could be that their own checks and balances found it. So there's really a variety of those things, but they are voluntary for the most part. And they can go back and look and see, like, hey, on this day, we know, like, that's why some of them are pretty specific. Every XYZ car built on this day is recalled, whereas all the rest of them might not be. So there's a pretty complex system of their own internal accounting, and then also the government requiring that this is a system to begin with. They work together pretty seamlessly for the most part. Every once in a while, you hear something weird like the automaker or the vendor saying, we're not going to recall that because we don't think there's anything wrong with it. That's very rare.
Mhm. And uh, the term recall, and I think Tesla fans have made um, a lot of noise about it. It's not really recall if they're updating the software. Um, do you, what would you call it in that case? I mean, is it an update? A mandated update, or it seems like semantics. I mean, it's still you
That's
can
what I think
identify.
too. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, all right.
Yeah. I mean,
Um,
you're at that point, what difference does it make what you call it?
right.
Something didn't work as expected or properly. Um, I guess you could have the argument that with cars that are very software heavy, you could have the argument, well, they're just using their consumers to test their software first, and then they update it. That I wouldn't want to be in that position of saying that,
Yeah,
but that's
yeah,
that could that's an argument that if you want to
yeah.
go for that, I guess you could do that.
You're the beta user. Yeah.
Yes.
What's the difference between a technical service bulletin, a TSB, and a recall?
A technical service bulletin is really just between the manufacturer and the dealer to say, hey, FYI, this is an issue. As the cars come in, update it, fix it, give them a discount, something like that. Like there's a known issue with the car, and as those cars come in for service, or as the people start investigating, you can find this online, by the way. You can go and find out whether your car has recalls and all that kind of stuff. That's usually I would say, behind the scenes type of thing. The dealership or the mechanic doing it, if you have a good relationship, they'll tell you, hey, by the way, there's a service bulletin for your
Yeah.
car. We just went ahead and updated it. It only costs $5 or whatever it is, or it's free.
Mm.
But a recall is usually something that's more serious, or that the possibility of it failing is more eminent. And the difference is, with a technical service bulletin, I don't know exactly how the pay for that works. It could be that
Yeah.
the dealership pays for it or the manufacturer absorbs the cost. I don't really know. But with a recall, the manufacturer pays for that, and the consumer is never on the hook for a recall, no matter how old your car is or no matter what's wrong with it.
So, you know, let's say the Toyota Tundra driver, was watching the news this week, saw that there
Mm-hmm,
was a recall, and it
mm-hmm.
seems like their car. What should the Toyota driver do? Toyota owner do?
The first thing I would do is be on the lookout for some kind of odd looking postcard or mailer that looks like it's from either Toyota or the federal government. People probably throw them away and assume it's an advertisement if it has the company's name on it. If it says, Buick on it, you're probably thinking it's a Buick ad, but it might not be. So
Yeah.
be on the lookout for that. The second thing you can do is go to the government website, which is I forget the order of the letters, NH.
NHSTA. NHSTA.
nhsta.gov, and you can put your VIN in, and it will tell you if you have open recalls on your car. By the way, that's a good tool for people who are buying a used car as well, because it will tell you if your car has open recalls or if it has recalls that have already been addressed. I did that with a car that I bought. The car that I bought was a Saab. It did have a Takata airbag, and according to the government website, that had already been addressed and fixed. So I felt comfortable buying it. So that's the second thing you can do, is go to the government website and put your VIN. The third thing, and I might do this in reverse order, I might do this first, is just call the dealer and say, I have a car of your, do I have any open recalls? And they're going to know, and they're going to make a way for you to get down there and do the repair. And I wouldn't wait. Here's why. People have heard about, part shortages and new car shortages in the past. That's kind of behind us, but you never know where there's going to be a lingering pocket of, they didn't know this was coming. This wasn't, it's planned to a degree, but they didn't know they were going to have to repair blank 100,000 vehicles with this one part. So you might want to call early, make an appointment early, just in case. If you live in a remote area, some dealerships are understaffed still. Some businesses are understaffed still. So I would call the dealer right away and say, does this apply to me? And then I would back that up with the government website.
Yeah, and because it's harder for the individual dealer to figure out that dynamic of like, am I going to get 3 of these or 50 of these?
Right. And they just can't have, think about it this way. If you look at a remote area, they have a limited real estate limited. They cannot stock 100 parts for some, a lug nut, or they just can't. They have to know what demand is. And when you call the dealer, I would also ask, is this serious enough that I shouldn't be driving the car? That's an important question to ask, because with the airbag thing, absolutely don't drive the car. The radio stops working intermittently. You probably can drive it still. It's going to be annoying, but whatever. But I would ask that from the person whose job it is to know those things.
And then like the thing I think of is like was it the Chevy Bolt where they said you shouldn't park it in your garage.
Right.
Like, well,
that's important to know. So, and the government website is not going to tell you that. It might say if there's a do not drive, but that's why talking to a person. And remember, the manufacturer through the dealership network, part of their job is to manage you. They're the consumer facing thing. Most people who buy a Chevrolet or a Toyota never actually deal with the company. They're dealing with the dealership.
Yeah.
So that's your first, your first line of defense is asking them questions, having a good relationship with them so that they want to help you. That's their job. It's not just to sell you a car and walk away. Their job is to manage that process for the rest of the time that you have that car. Perfect example of the Takata one. Those cars sometimes were 10 years old plus.
Oh, yeah. And it's also interesting to me, like, because I know there've been Rivian recalls and how that gets managed. Where they're like something physical has to be fixed. And down the road, in Connecticut, we can't buy Teslas directly from Tesla. I believe there's a Tesla service center in Fairfield County, down close to New York. But if you own a Tesla up this way, it's a whole different set of logistics to manage that too.
Yes.
Right. If it's a physical recall, it's obviously the software is something different.
Yes.
But
that also, I think that for a person who lives, people don't often think about this. For a person who lives in a remote area, dealership network should be a consideration. And here's another place where that comes up. I want to buy my kid a car for college. Where your kid goes to college matters. If you're going to be in a large urban area, you probably have the pick of the litter. If you're going to be out in a remote college that's very far from other urban or suburban areas, and you're going to buy them a brand that has fewer dealerships, that may be difficult to get repairs done. So if you live in a remote area, I would look into that before I even bought the car, because as this points out, even the best cars have recalls. It's really not an indication of quality. It's the system working as designed. But picking a brand that has multiple dealerships in your area is just going to help your peace of mind and your convenience going forward.
Yeah, right. Great. Anything that we didn't hit on that you wanted to point out?
I just think that it's something that people should take seriously. I think that it could be easy to be, sort of nonchalant about it. I would look into it if your car is ever mentioned on the news. I would look into it immediately. I wouldn't think, oh, it's probably nothing. They're making a big deal out of nothing. I wouldn't have that attitude at all.
Yeah.
No matter how old your car is. And don't think, oh, I can't afford it.
Yeah.
It's
so
free.
Right.
Yeah.
So talk to me a little bit about what Kelley Blue Book does. I mean, I remember the little
Actual
books.
book.
Yeah. But you're more than that now. You have a lot of different things going on.
Kelley Blue Book definitely still does valuations. It will tell you what your car should be worth if you're selling it as a private party. If you're selling it to a dealership, that's a slightly different price. What you should pay if you're purchasing it from a private party. So all the pricing stuff is still there. You could go in and you can put the condition, the year, the miles of your car and still get a price, a Kelley Blue Book price. That's still there and still worthwhile. But in addition, there's now the typical car research tools that you would have, like how much should this car cost? Kelley Blue Book has an amazing tool called Service Advisor. Service Advisor tells you how much a given repair should cost, what are common repairs on a car that you're considering buying or that you have, where you can get service in your area, even if it isn't through a franchise dealership. This is all data. There's data that says, hey, most XYZ cars have brake issues. This is about how much it should cost. That's a great tool for owners and for people selling cars, but also reviews, videos, shopping advice. How do I get the best deal? How much should I finance? All of that stuff is there on Kelley Blue Book as well. And that's just really a robust online site that you can do a bunch of stuff in one place, in addition to shopping for cars for sale, if that's what you want to do.
I had mentioned this before we started recording. You guys have an extensive YouTube channel with a lot of different things,
true.
and really interesting people to watch. I mean, they're really good at what they do. So, all right.
And very knowledgeable. I think knowledgeable is an important thing. Anybody can just say, this car does awesome burnouts. You don't need a special qualification for that. But having the history of knowing, hey, this car is new, this is what's changed, this is what's updated, and seeing it out in the world and how it functions in those day-to-day situations, that's huge too. So that group of people that does the YouTube videos are also editors for Kelley Blue Book, and they do a great job. And they're very knowledgeable, and they're knowledgeable in not just burnouts, but everyday use, value, how much should I spend, all that kind of stuff. You don't need a special qualification for, hey, y'all watch this. That's not what we're trying to do. We're trying to give people actual information that's going to help them make a better choice.
Great. All right. Thank you for joining us.
Thank
this
you.
has been another week of Car-Pinionated. And Glenn and Jeff will be back next week, and we'll see you later.